That was a lovely lunch. Thank you to Prototype. Hard to stop the networking, Carol. It's hard. It's hard. We should have switched MCs now. You know, get somebody really ugly, mean. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get going again, please. Thank you. Yeah. We're going to talk about the neighbourhood. This has come up a couple of times this morning, how to appeal to your local neighbourhood. And we've got a really couple of cool guys going to come up on stage, plus James Wilkinson. That's not to say he's not a cool guy, but he'll be up here too. So can I ask James, Paul and Peng to come up, please? Now, Paul, I know you told me not to read out any CV, okay, but hey, I'm running this thing, okay? So, and the reason I want to just touch a little bit on Paul, Wiste, and Low League Peng is that I found out I'd actually worked in Paul's hometown, which is Winnipeg, Canada. Most Canadians haven't been to Winnipeg, Canada, but I actually have lived and worked there at a fabulous hotel. Paul is the Regional Director of Development, Asia Pacific for the Jumeriah Group, based in Singapore. And you can read about him all in your catalogue, so he's asked me to stop there, which I will, Paul. You've got a pretty good CV, and they can read about that, plus you're from Winnipeg, Canada. I love that. And Peng, you've all known too. Peng, hotelier extraordinaire. You got a taste of him for those of you who were down at his place last night at the Old Clare, the new Old Clare. It's a terrific place and really part of the rejuvenation of that neighbourhood that they're going to talk about with James. So over to you guys.
For that, Howard, and allow me to say what a wonderful bow tie you have on today. I really like the color. It's a pleasure to be here today. What I'm about to talk about, the first little bit is going to be a little bit dry, but believe me, there's a method to my madness. This is a subject that I've been researching for the last few years. I've published in academic journals relating to this subject. So the basic idea here is that as we're designers, I'm an architect, what I want to do is challenge you to think about the way that we design hotels. So this is a version of what is a potential future. But what we need to do with hotel design, and I find that even my own designers that I work with are failing to do most of the time, is actually think about the future and think about the way that we are actually going to be using these properties. I know, Rob, we had some great presentations this morning about things that we're doing today and looking at new ways of doing things today, Miles as well, the Alex. But what we need to do is actually think about a little bit further into the future, and whether or not you agree or disagree with my version of the future, of this potential future, is not the point. The point here is that as designers, we're responsible to create this link into the future, and we're the ones that have been given that responsibility to be able to look into the future and design. So this is how we're going to start out. So first of all, I have to do a little bit of the infomercial. I work for the Jumeriah Group. This is our famous hotel. It's a 5-star hotel that everyone calls a 7-star hotel. It's called the Burj Al Arab. It's in Dubai. These are the hotels we have open in Asia right now. We have the Himalayas, which is an Izozaki design, lovely hotel, voted the top 10 iconic building in all of China by the people of China themselves, so bird's nest and all that. Here's the rest of the portfolio in Asia Pacific. There's 10 of them up right now. I have 8 under construction. I have 4 opening up in the next 24 months. Jumeriah 5 years ago had about 10 properties. This year we have 23 under operation. In another 5 years, we're going to have 40 under operation. So we've got a huge scope in terms of exponential growth that we've had. So as I was saying in the beginning, what we need to do in order to look into the future, we need to look into the past. So the very first lodges that we actually designed were based upon a Victorian idea of a palace. So as a traveler, you would travel away and you would go to these palaces and they would keep you inside and they'd keep you nice and tucked and warm. And you would go away to India and you'd be that dude in the middle sitting around and you'd have people holding on top of this umbrella for you. You would have all of the comforts transferred to you in your home, from your home. So you wouldn't go to India and go for a curry. You'd go to India and have British food at the British restaurant. But these houses became these palaces. You can see here's the raffles. We designed these so that you as a guest reflected yourself in front of that space. So traditionally in these places, you would take a portrait of yourself at the porte cochere. You'd be looking at yourself. You'd be showing your friends this idea that you were associating yourself as a luxury traveler in these types of palaces because you're a gentleman or a gentlewoman. You would be protected from the great outdoors with these types of spaces, okay? Because I work for a hotel group, it's easier to beat up on my own hotels instead of beat up someone else's. So this is one of our hotels. It's in Istanbul. It's a palace. It calls itself a palace. This was the first building in Turkey at the time to have electricity and the second building in Europe to have an elevator. Agatha Christie wrote Murder on the Orient Express in here. Hemingway stayed there, and James Bond, our old friend James Bond, this was the first hotel he ever stayed at. So it's got a lot of heritage, a lot of history, 100 keys. Okay, now we need to remember that because back then there wasn't a lot of luxury travel, but at the time this was built, Peng, we were talking yesterday, this was designed for the Orient Express traveler, so the super luxury traveler of the day. It was in an affluent neighborhood, close to good communication links, transport links. This is the feasibility study that we do today that we had 150 years ago. So not a lot has changed in the way that we design our hotels. And you can see that the way that the interiors respond, it's all about keeping the gentle people inside and keeping the great masses on the outside. It's that kind of barrier between today, the inside and the out for the rich and the poor. Now, moving into the mid-20th century, we had this tower block that came out. Now, luxury became a lot different after the Second World War. I mean, in between the wars, you had, Great Depression, you had all kinds of stuff happening. So from a design point of view, not a lot went on in terms of hotel design. But after the wars, we have a great example here, the Taniguchi Okura Hotel in Japan. And these were purpose-built hotels. This was a luxury hotel, had 798 keys. Now, you can imagine trying to deliver a 798-key luxury hotel in today's sort of feasibility. This was luxury on a mass market scale. So, friends in the States, we talk about the Fontainebleau, Lapidus design as well, brilliant. But these were built basically as huge blocks of luxury to cater to the masses. Within these types of buildings themselves, you'd have the cheap rooms at the bottom, you'd have the penthouse suite at the top, you'd have the big guy at the top looking down upon everyone else, right? This one was even designed so that you could have presidential wings, so that you could have a whole entourage rent off a wing by itself. Now, unfortunately, they're tearing half of it down right now. It's an absolute classic. If you can, Domus Jits did a special on it. It breaks my heart what they're doing to it. But it's progress, and we have to accept it. But these types of buildings became the barrier themselves. The building became the wall to stop the people from actually, getting through this. So this was still very much a luxury that was shared, but it was a luxury where you wouldn't go in there unless unless it was for the occasion. These types of brands, these types of luxury, were still catering specifically to these types of Western travelers. We're trying to be able to engage with you on a scale where, how do you put this, where luxury was still on a mass scale, but it was still the privilege of the few. Now, within these types of spaces, James Bond stayed here as well, by the way. Within these types of spaces, you would get these types of areas where you'd have, just as the previous example, You'd have billiards rooms, you'd have rooms, a lot of social rooms. You have rooms for ladies specifically sometimes. You'd have gentlemen's billiards, you'd have poker rooms, you have cards happening. The reason this happened was because at the time, travelers didn't have the access to information that they have today. So I might have just come off the plane or the boat and landed in Tokyo and sat next to you and listened and understood your language, and we'll strike up a conversation. How did the election go? What's the stock market like? What are you here for? What are you investing in? People needed each other. It was a much more social space, these places, and they were designed for that, so that we became the foil between the information themselves. Now, I know that we've talked earlier today about these communal spaces, Ace Hotels, things like that, Citizen M, great examples of brands. But back here, this was a necessity in terms of luxury. You were associating yourself with that type of person. So here you can see, in all of its grandeur, you've got the stacked layer beside. This is the way that luxury was presenting itself. Now, I do have one or two examples of this that I've seen recently where it's a monochromatic, mono-use block, but it's very rare to see this now in any type of developed urban center. Certainly a project on this size you couldn't do in Sydney. You couldn't do this in Shanghai. You could maybe start doing this in spots of Africa or something like that, or China, where you have a little bit more access to land. So trying to get through all this. Moving in today, we have now the mixed-use tower. That's what we're calling it. Everything's mixed use. So within that mixed use set, we've got the Alibaba. We're also designing these kind of big blocks outside of the town. So we've got Alibaba headquarters and we've got the Apple headquarters. These types of campuses are being designed because we don't have that access to land anymore. We don't have that kind of large access. So we're building outside of the cities in these remote places. But it's interesting because around this space, we now have about 5 hotels that have popped up that are these monochromatic hotels like the Okura, these ones that, because land is easier to get to. But if you think about what this context is going to look like in about 20 years, it's going to be completely different. This is going to be a mini city in itself. So again, you can see where we can build these kind of blocks, but now on the periphery. So what we mostly have are these. Now this is one of mine again. It's a Zaha Hadid designed hotel in Nanjing. It's a mixed-use property. So this goes back to Walter Gropius. This goes back to Corbusier. This is Unité de Habitation. This is live, work, love, die in one closed loop. These buildings that we're designing right now as mixed-use towers, and we see it now with a lot of boutiques where they say, oh, we want to live here. We never want to leave. We never want to go out. Well, that's what we're designing right now. And most of the architects, interior designers, you probably got one of these on the boards right now. Now, this is a construction photo, I don't know, 12 months ago. It's opening Christmas Day 2016, so you're all invited if you're not busy that day. This has got about 225 keys. So you can see that the original hotels, the Para Palace, 100 keys, Okura, 800 keys. Now we're coming down, and again, the luxury hotels that if you ask me, you give me any city, if you say how big you're going to go, it's going to be about 200 to 250 keys for luxury. So what we're seeing is that luxury is actually starting to shrink. Yeah, and if you ask, most of the guys in the room who are designing, it's very rare that you're going to have a 400-key luxury hotel unless you have a casino or some kind of something that is beside it that has that kind of extra special draw. Because, quite honestly, you can't get the OC and rate if you're going to build that big on a luxury level. So here's some interior shots, just to give you, everyone likes to see the pretty pictures. So here's some shots. So, we've got that's the sky pool, and we've got the salty sports bar and the lobby and everything else. So what we're looking at here is this language that's changing in terms of the way that we respond to luxury. You think about the earlier picture of the interior of the Para Palace, where we would be wearing dinner jackets and ball gowns out in the evenings for our dinners. Now we're going to a casual sports bar, or we're going to some kind of all-day dining that's a bit funky. Whether or not we like to admit it, luxury has changed. Yeah, and we all forget about this when we're designing luxury. We think that luxury stayed the same. Luxury changes on a daily basis. To me, after coming off a plane and a train and maybe a taxi or even a boat, 18 hours, I want a hot shower and a bed. I don't care what hotel it is. I don't care if it's 5-star. I don't care if it's 2-star. So luxury for all of us individually changes as we go along. So when we talk about the concept of luxury, we have to also understand that luxury changes for each of us individually and each demographic that we're trying to design for. So now we're into the main idea of this, which is I call the component hotel. Gus, I put this picture up for you today. The idea of the component hotel is that when we look at the subtle trends in the markets that we're dealing with right now, and we start extrapolating that across the city, I believe that our cities are going to be fundamentally changing. And I believe that within those cities, hotels are going to be changing with them. Great example with Peng, your hotels, the way you're doing this. That to me is very much luxury design, whether or not you're afraid to admit that or not. I think it's a very luxurious hotel. So what we need to do is look at the future city through this kind of fabric where we have to acknowledge that this change is coming. Now, when we're faced with the question, would you rather stay in the 95th floor of the Shanghai Park Hyatt? I'll give you a one-bedroom suite. Or I'll give you guys a one-bedroom flat inside of the French Quarter in Shanghai. I would say 99% of us are going to take the flat in the French Quarter. Now, whether or not we as designers or operators acknowledge this, it's the dirty secret, but the boutique hotel started it out, but Airbnb, these flip keys, they're changing the landscape of the way that we're designing hotels. So here's an example of the way that we're doing all of, you see Jumeriah's up there. There we are, luxury, traditional. And then we've got our lifestyle venue brand over here. We've seen Citizen M. You can see how there's this proliferation of brands that are coming out. And before they were individually operated, back to the Para Palace, back to the Okura, which is now a brand, but at the time it wasn't. These types of spaces are becoming much more brand saturated. And today we're hearing things like luxury light and super economy luxury and all these different types of luxuries. We got to get over that. We just got to understand that what we're always designing for is always going to be a luxury. When I was a kid and we went on a trip, my mom probably thought the Holiday Inn with a hot bath and a closed door was luxury to her, right? We have to accept the fact that I talk to designers like, oh, I don't care, that's just a 4-star. I want to show you that. No. It's all about the experience. Yeah. So when we look at the Okura and we travel back in time, these are historical travel brochures. So we've got a French chef. That's okay. We've got French chefs there. You're not going to get sick. You can eat there. You got a white guy coming out of a car. Again, Western guy coming out. So it's got to be safe, right? James Bond stays there, guys. It's all right, right? But then you think about these guys and Josh. Schrager is he's my hero. First hotel I ever worked on was Ian Schrager in London. Ian changed the game. He came up and said, I can make a 4-star in New York, the rate and best, top of the league in New York. And everybody, all the big brands, the Hiltons, everyone laughed at him. He did that by being able to create this type of boutique experience that we call. But when you think about the way that this that the industry has responded. It's taken, 20, 30 years for these big brands to then create their own boutique, luxury, light lifestyle, whatever you want to call it. It's taken them this time to come up and do what was being done, 30 years ago in New York City. So here we go. Here's the, roll out the Darth Vader music because, here's Airbnb, right? All the operators, we hate them. They're going to take all of our money. Look at Paris. Paris is crap now, right? But we have to accept the fact that people are going to this because that's luxury. When we go back to the idea of the French Quarter and staying in that flat in the French Quarter, we all want that luxury. We all want that experience, And as hotel designers, how many times have we said, oh, we're going to do this restaurant concept that's going to bring the people in. It's going to bring them in and it's going to hold them in because that is what Sydney's all about. You know what Sydney's all about? Sydney's all about getting out of your hotel. It's about staying in a place like this sometimes and walking around the streets, getting lost on Argyle or popping into some other shop. But you touched on it in your Perth, and I thought that's fantastic because that's what we've got to look at when we're talking about designing luxury. It's about luxury of the space and the experience. So I like to say that when you think about what the boutique hotel did to the big box, you now have these guerrilla armies of Airbnb taking it back to the boutique hotels as well. You're getting a warfare hitting on multiple points from multiple angles. And we need to understand that when we're designing our hotels, that we need to also start looking into the effect on how we're going to design these hotels. Because when we look at the future, if we think about a life without Airbnb 20 years ago, and we think about a life with Airbnb in 20 years, It's going to be a very different landscape. And we need to be able to bring a flexibility into our design to be able to anticipate these types of changes, because the demographics are changing. You know, my mom and dad, they love to stay at, luxury brands and things like that, but there's a new millennial mindset of people that actually want to stay in these types of spaces and be offered that type of luxury. So this type of property I call the component hotel. And so what we do with the component hotel is we're basically creating a kit of parts. Instead of creating this mixed-use system, this Corbusian idea of unité, one size fits all, you can live, die, love, and live, love, and die inside of one building. Now we're starting to talk about creating a mesh that goes across a city. And this mesh itself becomes a hotel. So you're always going to have a central hotel, but the number of keys in that hotel is going to come down. It's going to come down to about, let's say, 100 or so. This is my crystal ball, don't forget. I'm not right or wrong. I'm just my crystal ball. But you're going to come down to about 100 keys. And what's going to happen is you're going to be able to pull out these components of the hotel and start scattering them across the city. So, we've done it with back of house, like call centers, laundries, bakeries. We've done that already in the past. That's yesterday. But what we're going to do now is we're going to start looking at creating that little space in the French concession in Shanghai by a Four Seasons, right? By a Jumeriah, by a Mandarin Oriental. And you're going to have these experiences. And what we're going to be able to do as designers is design specifically for different types of travelers. So the way that I'm going to respond to a room is going to be different to the way my mom responds to a room, or even a woman the same age as me but from a different country who's also there on business. So we'll be able to have this type of flexibility within our design. Now, you might say, how do you do this? It's great you're talking about it, but I'm actually doing this in parts of my portfolio right now within a super luxury brand that's traditional luxury. We're looking into ways of doing this now. And maybe it's a bit subversive because I don't tell my bosses about it, but it's ways that we're looking at actually trying to influence the way that the city is going and influence the way that if you talk about a 20-year, 25-year HMA, in 20 years the landscape's going to be different, guys. So as designers, as architects, as interior designers, we need to think about this and the way that we're going to actually approach all of it. So here we have an example of Ace Hotels, which I think is a great brand. I think that Ace Hotels brings in that kind of idea of the component. It allows people to come in. It's a much more inclusive type of brand. You're going to be able to have a next generation of hotels that branches off from this type, where you can have an F&B outlet outside the hotel. You can have accommodation outside the hotel. You can have gyms outside the hotel. You can have all these different facilities, functions. And what that'll allow us to do is make that hotel smaller, but also make it much more responsive to the market. So if market demands are going up, Olympics are coming. Everyone talks about how Sydney built all this stuff for the Olympics and everyone went away. Airbnb is taking up that space right now when there's a big event. Why can't the hotel brands start taking up that type of space? Why can't we put out F&B outlets outside so that we actually encourage our guests to go outside and they think they're getting a local experience in a local restaurant where it's engined by a luxury brand or any other brand? So it's this type of component idea that people want this type of experience, and you're not going to get this type of experience in a hotel because it's too bespoke for some people. It's too much down to, you can't change this in 5 years. You can't roll it over and over and over because it's a hotel. But when you build outside, if this kind of a concept didn't work, you could tear it down and build it up another 3-6 months, you have a new F&B outlet. So you could always stay fresh, always stay relevant within the crowd and within the competition. So when we're looking forward into all of this, we have to then finally sort of understand where prime parcels of land then can become much more effectively used within a city. So if you have only 60% occupancy, that means 40% of that land use is actually or that building is actually not being used according to its purpose. So what we'll be able to do if we start looking at these types of ideas is building in more efficient cities, more efficient design. And guys, it's not about hotels, it's about the way that we're going to be designing cities in general. So when we look at the last little sort of bit of it all, we have to then understand that the guest rooms themselves are going to change. Terrell is my favorite artist in the world, so I'm going to show you a couple of his stuff. But we're going to start looking at the way that again that beautiful one that Rob showed today that he won the award for. Congratulations! It was an absolute magnificent design where the stairs are changing, everything's popping out. We have to look at the way that we're actually doing these things because our lifestyles are changing along with it. So Again, guys, it's our responsibility. It's not our owner's responsibility. It's not the investors. It's ours. But when we are designing these spaces, we need to actually look at what I think are the three most important materials that we're ever going to use as designers within the hotel sphere. And that first element, that first material we're going to use is time. Because time is a luxury. Sometimes you have a lot of time, sometimes you have a little bit of time, but how we actually use that time is the luxury itself. I know that the owner of Uber said that he doesn't sell journeys, he sells time, because you can get the Uber taxi faster than any other taxi group that you can get. Yeah, you're going to pay a premium, but that's what luxury is about sometimes. So you have to factor in the influence of time within your design. Now, the next element that I think is equally critical is space. And I know today we've seen a lot of excellent examples of smaller rooms. And I'm not saying that smaller rooms are not luxurious, but there's sometimes where you just need that kind of luxury of space. And within resort design, we see a lot of design coming in with little villas and little gardens. You have indoor-outdoor space, whereas before you'd be up in the penthouse. But we have to understand that space in itself is a luxury. So how we actually interpret that space into that design is equally as critical as the way that we actually spend the time in there. And then finally, the most important of the three elements is experience. If we don't give an honest experience, we don't give the actual authentic experience within the design, the whole thing falls apart. So I bet you, again, most of us would be absolutely happy to eat in this experience if we were in Hong Kong. Absolutely thrilled to go down to a place like this and to find a place like this and to know that this is the place, you know, the Shalong Bao place in New York. This is the kind of place that we want to go to, yeah? It doesn't mean that we have to wear a dinner jacket and a tuxedo and a ball gown anymore. Luxury is different, whether or not we like to admit it or not. We don't have to stay inside the hotel anymore because we're afraid of food poisoning. You know, I remember the days of bottled water and always asking, no ice, don't give me ice. Ice is bad. Yeah. Now we're okay with that kind of stuff, right? You know? I mean, the horror I had once in Thailand, I ordered a Coke, and they gave me ice, and I was drinking. My friend said, "Oh, you're gonna die in Thailand." Yeah. So, in conclusion, the way that we design hotels today has a lot of similarity with the way that we designed in the past. However, when you think about social media, when you think about the way that the society has changed and our cities have changed and the way that we've become more compressed within our lives, we need to also take those factors in when we're thinking about how we're going to be designing in the future. When you look at this diagram of every internet device connected in the world, and you think about what this would have looked like 50 years ago, and then you look at the travel patterns of people, you can see that we can directly correspond social media and access to information with our travel patterns. And if we don't recognize the impact of this on the way that we design and the way that we design our cities and our futures, we're going to be missing the point here, guys, and we're going to be designing obsolescence into our buildings. So if we don't change this, our cities will change this inherently, and that's why we get things like Airbnb. And that's why we will get these responses, because we're not being fast enough. We're not being clever enough. We're not anticipating the needs of our clients and our end users enough. And that's it.
I love the igloo.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly happy we've recorded that so we can all watch it back afterwards. I think it was it made a fantastic presentation, and I think really getting into the whole ideals of you know, about as we saw last night, I guess with the new old Claire is how it's calling it now.
Yeah.
On how you've designed a hotel really in the neighbourhood. I'd love to get Paul said a few things here. Paul, what do you think with what Peng's done with the old Claire, and then across the road with that new little laneway he's done with the tables that you were just showing a photo of? It was very similar. And how would this fit in other parts, do you think, as well?
First of all, I'm happy that Peng has the catalog, because he has my CV now. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think that's the way it's going. And I think when you look at the way that Peng has designed these really beautiful F&B outlets that are actually not even connected by hallway through his hotel, that you have to go outside, so it feels like they're outside units, and the Spice Alley as well. I know that you have an interest in that. those are the type of things that we need to be providing for our guests, because the most beautiful thing about your place is that I was there on Monday at 5 o'clock and the bar was packed. And it wasn't hotel guests, because you and I were having breakfast in the morning. And there were certainly more people in the bar than there were there in the morning for breakfast. And usually it's the opposite way within a hotel. You'll get everyone there at breakfast time and no one there at the bar. So obviously you've struck that nerve. But I think that where it's possible in the future, let's just say that, and I hope this is the truth, but that your property here in Sydney is so successful that you're at 100% occupancy, well, then there's the opportunity to start looking in the neighborhood and start pulling out little flats and start turning those into units that are also connected. Because if your F&B's outside of your hotel, why can't one of your apartments, one of your units? And start looking at ways of doing that. And then maybe the market cycle is going down, so then you rent it out for a year to somebody, and you just leave it as a typical apartment. The hotel market's coming back up. You pull it back into the inventory. Which
is kind of, Peng, what you've done in Singapore. In fact, you've got so many restaurants that aren't attached to hotels. So someone says, "Oh, where should we go for dinner tonight?" And then the hotel staff can recommend, "Oh, yeah, we've got a place that's actually 3 blocks down." So, how important again is designing something, I guess, that fits in with the neighbourhood, that brings in the neighbourhood, that creates a buzz in the neighbourhood? And I think, like Paul just said, it's so nice. You walk out of the hotel and into a separate entrance into the hotel, into the restaurant. Sorry.
I mean, for me, it's always been a key part of our philosophy, because we run small boutique hotels in usually off the center of town. We're usually a little bit sort of in neighborhoods where things are a little bit sort of more local. So for us, it's always a conscious decision that we have to make ourselves really part of the fabric of that local community. Because when you're in somewhere like Chinatown in Singapore or Little India, Chippendale in Sydney, you can't put in that traditional 5-star luxury thing. You got to be part of the neighborhood. You want people to come into your lobby and just hang out. A little bit like Ace does, I think, in a sense. Obviously, we're a much smaller scale, and we do a lot of F&B. We're much F&B as we are a hotel, which is pretty unusual. Most hoteliers don't want to touch F&B, But whereas we embrace it and we try and make really interesting restaurants. But because of our scale in terms of hotels, we realize that 95% of the people, our potential customers for the F&B, are not going to be hotel guests. The Eau Claire is a 62-room hotel. We got 3 restaurants and 2 bars. So it's not really that sort of thing where you're like, oh well, I'm going to try and get my in-house guests to dine at our establishments. We don't care. We want them to go out, and we want locals to come in and dine with us. So we very much look at that localization, that sort of embracing the neighborhood concept, because it's really the only way we're ever going to survive.
If you look at sort of what some hotels do, obviously QT, have got barber shops in theirs, which is quite a cool concept, and you got other hotels around the world have got recording studios. There's a few hotels now that have artists in residence, and they'll go and do they'll perform in the studio, and you can watch it on all the TVs, and then they'll go and do a performance on the roof, and really integrating everything. Paul, on a larger scale and a luxurious Jumeriah scale, how close do you think this breach is getting between what Peng's doing and then your new skyscrapers all throughout Asia? I
think what we're faced with, and I think Josh also addressed that as well quite succinctly, is that we're in a luxury type of sphere. We're in that sort of super luxe kind of space where it's much more harder to have the flexibility that you're talking about. But in the same sense, the market's changing so that within the portfolio we're able to find these kind of spaces. So if we were in a location like Los Angeles that was close to a lot of recording studios, then it would make absolute sense. For example, one of the little things I once talked about was we were in the diplomatic area, and we looked at the idea of actually putting a Faraday cage around some of our business meeting rooms so that you had total privacy in terms of any kind of bugging from any kind of government or industrial espionage that might want to come in. So you can, if you're the safest person for that in the world, yes, okay, fine. That means that everyone's going to try to bug that room, I guess. But the same idea is that you're at least providing some sense of relevance for whatever that location is, and being able to plug in those bits is the ultimate flexibility, gives you that luxury.
And how much do you think probably some of the more luxury brands on the large scale, particularly throughout Asia, through the Middle East, need to start adapting really this neighborhood concept? Probably, Peng, you stay in a lot of hotels as well, so you probably see it. So what do you guys think of that? Do you think it's something that they're going to have to embrace to be relevant going forward?
I think, look, there's so much segmentation in the market. There'll always be a place for the traditional five-star hotels. There'll always be a place for it. Do they need to go into neighborhoods? Probably not. They can have sub-brands that do. Can I see a Jumeriah in Chippendale? Probably not. So the reality is that there's a space for a Jumeriah brand. There's a space for a St. Regis. Yeah. There's a space for a Morgan's type hotel. Space for hotels like ours. You couldn't put a 500-room hotel in Chippendale. So the reality is that you're going to get these sort of segmentation. Hotels like ours going into interesting neighborhoods, where we can be a real focal point for that neighborhood, and we fit in quite well. So I think I'm not terribly concerned about the bigger brands going into neighborhoods and things like that. They'll embrace certain elements of it, but some parts of it they'll never really kind of be able to get into that space.
There's a huge ecosystem. There's a huge ecosystem of option and opportunity. It's no longer where you remember the old days. You go to the travel agent, you take the shiny brochure, and that's where you go because that's where you knew you can get good food and security. No one's going to steal from your safe while you're out. That's all changed now. The way that we travel is fundamentally different now because of our access to information. So I don't see any competition in the market. I just see complement. I see that kind of the beauty of choice, the luxury of choice, not having to look at the Okura brochure with the French chef on it and the chauffeur coming. We all know that stuff's available now wherever you go, and I think that choice gives us the choice of experience.
And Peng, you go out there like you have in Sydney. You've got 3 amazing chefs. You've got 3 very interesting F&B spaces. If one part of that challenge is getting the chef, isn't it? How important is it then to be nailing the design in each of those outlets?
I think nowadays it's having good food is a necessity, but it's probably not sufficient. You have to have concept, you have to have the design, you have to have the service, because restaurant business is so sophisticated nowadays. You can perhaps get away with just being really good food if you're in a hawker center in Singapore. Right, but once you're into that lifestyle space, once you're into that luxury space, everything is important, everything. And the fact that you give someone great food, but the service sucks or the lighting is bad, you're just going to get spoiled the whole experience. In a way, it's the same as a hotel. It's a little bit of theater, right? The room has to be not just comfortable. It has to look great. It has to have all the amenities that you expect nowadays. So it's not a question of, I've got the most comfortable bed, and that's good enough. Nowadays, it rarely is. So I think for F&B, for hotels, for everything you do nowadays, once you cater to that sophisticated class, everything matters.
And we were talking before about, we saw photos up of a crazy cafe in Cape Town, and saying, you can't really go and switch that around at a hotel in a couple of years. Peng, I don't think you've actually redesigned almost any of your restaurants, have you, since you've opened them?
Not the restaurants, no. I mean, we update them occasionally, furniture changes, things like that. But the basic design, if you design it well, can last for up to 10 years, I guess. But we do change things like the furnishings, things like that, the higher wear and tear kind of thing, and we do upgrade things. But generally, I mean, in a hotel environment, it's much harder to completely change your F&B concept every 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
And obviously, Paul, as far as Jumeriah is concerned, I mean, now is it more of a focus than ever to really get that F&B right from the very outset and have longevity through it?
I think we have to get it right because, generally speaking, we've been getting it wrong for so long in terms of F&B. We've just assumed that because we can create that sanctity of environment in terms of luxury that people are going to stay. But what's happening now is that people are wanting to go out to these little kind of crazy places, like the picture I showed of the gentleman eating in Hong Kong. People are happy doing that. That's part of their experience. And I took my wife out for our wedding anniversary to Raffles. Fancy. Got a London cab. I did everything in advance. My daughter was all excited. We went to this traditional restaurant because traditional luxury. There wasn't a person in that place. And it killed the night for me because I wanted to have atmosphere. I wanted to have this type of, really return back to this luxury. So I had to make this joke that I rented out the restaurant for, right? So, if there's an example of where we're going wrong as an industry, it's in those types of spaces, and that's where Peng is getting it so right.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that 10 years ago, the Raffles Grill, would have been one of the finest restaurants in Singapore, and had the best wine list. But if you go there now, it's you know, nobody goes there. You know, maybe occasionally a hotel guest will come down, but really it's still a wonderful dining room. Still has great service. The food is not as good as it used to be, but you know, nobody goes. It's
And they premix the Singapore slings anyway in the bar.
and they premix Singapore slings in the long bar.
Yeah.
So okay, here's a good question for you both, because that hotel hasn't had a renovation in some time. What would you both do with that property if you had your hands on it?
Well, I think, you know, Raffles, given its heritage, you'd have to respect it. I would update it, but I think, you know, you couldn't ever kind of make it into a trendy Morgan's hotel. At the end of the day, the Raffles will always be the Raffles. You'd certainly have to update it, bring the latest technology, make it super luxurious. It is a very tired hotel because I think it's been about 15 years since it had its last upgrade, you know, and I think it's crying out for that. But the Raffles is the Raffles.
Yeah, but there's a special thing about it that most luxury hotels, the difference with Raffles is that you can actually walk in and out onto the grounds without having to go through the porte cochere. So there is this kind of ability. I know, let's use Morgan's. I mean, I could see them doing an amazing job there because you could start using that perforation through the building fabric in terms of ways of bringing new people in and making new experiences inside there. You know, and if you had someone with your vision in terms of F&B concepting, you know, turning in the long bar into, you know, having that kind of, you know, back to basics, beautiful food, really simple, honest fare, I think you could really strike a chord. But the balance is that you have to do it within a Perenican type of design style. You cannot take it out and start turning it into like you know, what we used to call 15 years ago, like a hip hotel. You do that, you're going to kill this, you're going to rip the soul out of it. But what you need to do is to make that luxury more relevant, that luxury where you can go in there dressed in jeans and a t-shirt and still feel like you're in a luxurious experience with everyone around you, that you don't have to put on a bow tie to go inside.
Which is incredible, because when we look at the concept design of the neighbourhood, I mean, you guys don't go, and there was no one there when you went in, Paul. So clearly the locals aren't going in, which is quite a shame for an iconic hotel that 20 years ago was the place for a fancy dinner, was the place to go out for nice cocktails.
I mean, look, my mom came to Singapore. First thing she wanted to see was Raffles. You know, she wanted to have a sling, right? It's this kind. It's got that heritage. It's got that cachet, but it needs to have the excitement that it once had. And it might not mean that the excitement looks like it used to, but it's that luxury of experience that I think, if we're going to pick on that, I think that's what you're missing within that hotel. Because a luxury hotel, when you walk into a luxury hotel, your waist should feel 2 inches slimmer. You should feel 2 inches taller, right? It's about going in there and having that confidence. You know, it's like putting on a brand new pair of shoes and, you know, and feeling that kind of that way about yourself. And that's what real luxury design does to you. And that's what, in a space like that, is lacking. It's there, right?
And what kind of challenges are you having when you have to put up a skyscraper in a neighbourhood, and like you said, it's becoming the centrepiece of a neighbourhood in some of these cities in Asia, because literally there is no room anymore on places like the Bourne to go and put another skyscraper up. Peng, you've got a beautiful property there. Paul, the challenge of trying to say to everyone, hey, come to our skyscraper and go up, as opposed to go and drink at the front bar of the Old Clare and the old pub?
Well, I think we face similar challenges, Peng and I, because one of the things that at least my brand promises, and some of the other luxury brands, they have their own way of doing things, so I don't want to beat up on them. But we try to promise a culturally connected experience. And so what I try to do is make sure that if you're from Winnipeg, Canada, and you're going into our hotel in Nanjing, that it's going to look like there are Chinese elements in it. Okay? But if you're a Chinese guest, you're going to recognize that those elements are from that province or from that city, and they tell a story about that location itself, maybe even that neighborhood. Maybe we serve food that is directly related to that neighborhood. Yeah? I mean, Nanjing has Ming Dynasty pottery, so I guarantee you're going to see Ming pottery, like that kind of blue coming through in the rooms. You're going to see those types of ideas. So all of our F&B outlets are designed around a poem that was written at a time within Nanjing. So yeah, I'm from Winnipeg. I can't read a Chinese script. But as a Chinese guest, you're going to know that you're not just in an Asian hotel. We're trying to tap into what Peng's trying to do, but just a different direction.
So in places like Nanjing, you're almost creating a new neighbourhood then, to a degree, aren't you? with what the hotel's offering in terms of bringing people in.
Yeah, absolutely. It was farmland, 20 years ago.
Now, before we do, I've got a few more minutes here. Middle East, obviously, in Dubai, all the restaurants and bars are all located within hotels and around hotels. There aren't any neighbourhoods really in Dubai. There are now. You've got obviously Dubai Marina, and you've got Jumeirah Beach and whatnot. Paul, the challenge of Dubai, where that neighbourhood doesn't exist, and obviously bringing people in, because obviously a lot of the people who go there are locals or expats living in Dubai. So, what are some of the challenges in the Middle East that Jumeirah is facing?
I think that, I think we're incredibly successful in the Middle East, thank God. We're doing quite well because we do tap into that idea of bringing in that cultural connectivity to our experiences. And again, it's nothing against a place like, I know we saw earlier a slide of the Armani Hotel. That's great. They're doing their thing. But what we're trying to do for our guests is to give them an authentic Arabian experience packaged in different ways. So if you want to stay at the Burj Al Arab, you're going to get a very different experience than if you're staying in our little all-villa complex called the Dar Al Masiyaf, which has the waterways and canals going through it. But within that kind of luxury, the one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that we still try to give back into society in different ways. So like we have, I know it sounds silly, but we have a marine biology facility within the Burj Al Arab on the 4th floor. We save turtles. And we save all kinds of life. And they'll stay with us for 2-3 years, some of these guys. We'll GPS it. And I saw today a great example of birds on top of a Citizen M. In Frankfurt, we have beehives. And so what we do with that is we let the bees go out, and they actually are pollinating around in the neighborhood. So we're giving all of our neighborhood flowers, right? So it's those ways of trying to both reach the public in and give them that experience, but also give back out to the public. And we track our turtles to our other resorts in the Maldives. It's amazing.
And yeah.
No, I mean, just one of those things about, when you look at Asia and Middle East, where perhaps there's this large urban growth versus, traditional older European cities, or in Australia like this, where it's really about renewal of old urban centers. I mean, those type of neighborhoods are very different from the hotels you create in new neighborhoods, because in a sense, when you create that new neighborhood, you have a chance to build that community. Whereas when a lot of projects, when you look at urban renewal projects, you're really kind of making sure that you are existing within the community that's there already. So I think it's a very interesting juxtaposition, what a brand like a Jumeriah might do versus, what a hotel like ours might do within this sort of urban renewal neighborhoods. It's very, very different, and the stakeholders that you influence in your neighborhood are so different too.
And Peng, as we were discussing last night, you're notorious for going into fairly dodgy neighbourhoods around the world. And Bethnal Green in London is still dodgy, but and Chippendale's not so dodgy. But do you have your eye on one or two cities and edgy neighbourhoods at the moment where you'd like to go in with your company?
I don't really look at it that way. A lot of times the opportunities come to me rather than me go out looking for them, because our projects are so unique. We always look at sort of heritage buildings in sort of areas that are, as you put it, slightly dodgy, slightly tired, and I like that because our properties are edgy,
But one thing I think that came up was, you were talking about how you've received criticism in the past versus gentrification, but I think that on the contrary, you actually should be commended for preserving that street culture, because you know what, people could be bulldozing those things down and putting up flats. And that you have to look at the other side of what you're doing in terms of that regeneration, is that you're capturing that culture and you're capturing that experience for people and for future generations to become able to actually experience what once was there. So it's amazing what you're doing, Peng.
Fantastic. Well, look forward to chatting more with both of you on our internationals panel, where we open the panel right up to everyone on the floor. So please get some great questions ready, and please thank Paul for a wonderful presentation, and obviously Peng's amazing insight as always. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, James, Peng and Paul. By the way, just a couple of announcements. Firstly, there will be a famil of this hotel at 5 o'clock. As I mentioned before, Shape did the Horizon Club and the Horizon Club rooms here in its last refurbishment. If you want to join, there's 2 people who have asked me to put their names up. If you want to join, they'll meet in the lobby at 5 o'clock. So Grant, Shane, Paul Campbell, give me your cards. That's where the hotel will be at 5 o'clock for that, for Mill. And secondly, another little housekeeping matter, Alicio Products down here, Peter and Roland, apparently have 300 show bags full of goodies that they do not want to take home with them. So you're welcome to visit them during the coffee break or after the event today and pick up those little goodies. While, of course, you see all the other exhibitors that have been terrific here today. It is my great pleasure to welcome again James back onto stage to talk to Jerry Schwartz. Dr. Jerry Schwartz graduated from the University of Sydney in medicine. He's a cosmetic surgeon, has a multifaceted general practice in Matraville. His family has always been in the hotel business. He's now CEO of the business. Come on up, Jerry. Come on. Yeah. Maybe what you don't know about Jerry, besides having 3,000 rooms in Sydney, Newcastle, the Hunter, Blue Mountains, Canberra and Melbourne, he's also got a brewery, a vineyard, a distillery, an airline. Can I call it an airline? It's a stretch. An airline. The brewery makes cider and craft beer. The cider's very, very good. The light beer's not bad. Have I dropped anything? No, I don't think so. Please have a seat. Please welcome Jerry.
So you would have enjoyed that last panel, Jerry.
Very much so.
Peng's one of your new neighbours in Sydney, isn't he? Down the street from your
I was telling him, just down the road.
Now, obviously...
the other connection with Peng is that in a past life he's been a lawyer. Well, I'm a doctor, so it's very interesting how we gravitate from all different backgrounds into the hotel industry.
So it must make you immensely, they're a potential competitor, so not overly, but they're excited but proud to see someone investing in that kind of a project with great restaurants, really great hotel, and which is what you do in Sydney. You also spend a lot of money investing in hotels, so it must delight you to see someone else also loving the project.
Certainly not a competitor, and I say the same thing with cosmetic surgery. The world is big enough for more than one of us. And in fact, it's lovely to see that someone is putting a lot of effort into not bulldozing down a heritage building, but to reinvigorate it and make it part of the community. I mean, so it's certainly not a competitor.
Not so long ago, there was a almost dormant brewery down the road from you, and that whole area is just really lively now. And
it's amazing how the whole of Sydney now is moving down towards Broadway.
And kind of funny because at the same time you're going and putting up a 600-room Sofitel at Darling Harbour, which is again part of a massive regeneration of that entire area, and it's all exciting, mate. You're adding more floors at your Surrey Hills Hotel and in Darling Harbour. One thing I did want to ask was how important is investing in good design, first of all, and two, how important is it investing in redesigning as well?
Well, vitally important. That's why we're all here. It's about giving value to your guest, value for money, and the world is changing. You know, what used to be crappy, old-fashioned three-star hotels, I mean, are now beautiful design, modern, technologically advanced. You know, people don't put up with what they put up with. You know, in the past, hotels had share bathrooms. You know, one of my hotels, the Victoria Hotel in Melbourne, when the family purchased it, was 468 rooms, and that was because a lot of the rooms were small and stingy and had no bathroom. And in fact, it's been an 8-year job to refurbish it, virtually stripping out most of the walls and stripping out everything, the box air conditioners, and it's now only a 370-room hotel, and that is because of the fact that all the rooms have been made bigger and they've all got en suites. So in the past, when people quite happily put up with just a basic bed, now there's much more demand.
Yeah, we've got some photos of Sofitel Darling Harbour up on the screen shortly, Jerry, and we've all seen the external of the building, which is up on the screen now, which looks amazing. we've seen a couple of other images come through that are of the, looks like to be a restaurant or a club lounge, another one of a pool. We haven't seen anything of the rooms yet, Jerry. Can you tell us what's going to be inside this beautiful shell at Darling Harbour? Give us a little bit of insight into what you're coming up with in this hotel.
Yes, I'm fortunate here we have representatives from Accor, and I've missed out on Kingsley's talk this morning, Kingsley Amos. We have our designer, A+, Mike. We have SFC's representative, Paul, and in fact, it's sort of like buying a hotel off the plan, except that the plan which I bought was in evolution. There was just the blueprint, and it's evolved since then. And as you can guess, there has been so much discussion, and there is so much discussion. And it's a lot of people put their input in, you know, and there's brand standards. In fact, it's got to be a 5-star deluxe hotel because that's what I paid for. It's got to be something special. I love the talk beforehand about, you know, what defines luxury, timelessness, space, and as far as the actual design, it's evolved quite a lot. We want it to be modern. We've talked about issues of whether you need, for example, a desk for travellers, or whether you just have a lounge table. I mean, even that itself has had a lot of discussion. My particular interest is the technology, and Ted Horner will be talking afterwards, talking about all the technology of the future, and I've put a lot of effort in myself into that, about having the technology of, this will be a hotel that has key phone apps for your key, and it will take advantage of Bluetooth and geolocation, and the rooms will be properly integrated, the lighting system, which doesn't really answer your question. What does it look like? We've talked about timber, you know, the mixture of timber with the best of stones and granites, and the carpets. You know, you talk first about the materials you use, and they've got to be, you know, exclusive materials. Then about the colouring. And there's been a lot of discussion there, and my wife is more the interior designer than me, that, you know, talked about the mixture of the bespoke carpet, which has different shades of brown in it, and mixing that with the timbering on the wall, and the colouring of the marble and the bench tops. So obviously we want to give it all a wow factor. You know, you want to give all the rooms a wow factor. There'll be 10% suites, so they could have an even more wow factor. It doesn't answer without pictures. You know, I suppose I should get Mike to come and show pictures, but that's not even, you know, that's not even finalised really what we're doing. We've had one mock-up room. We're having a second mock-up room. I hope there is a representative from Lend-Lease, that you must stay in the mock-up room. You know, we must be locked up in the mock-up room overnight to see that it works. You know, that's vital, because we've got to get the mock-up room correct, so that you don't get product, which is 590 rooms, incorrect.
So when you look at sort of your brief to the design firms and architecture firms, and what have you kind of given them? Have you said you want something that's more classically like European? Do you want something that's a bit of Asian inspired? Because obviously Sofitels around the world it can differ in design in terms of where they are located. So what was your kind of little brief that you told them?
Well, the first part of my brief, it's like a recorded message, is we want a 5-star luxury hotel, and we don't want to compromise on quality. So that's sort of a basic bit of the brief. As far as the design that goes in, well, we're Australia, so it's got to have an Australian influence. What does Australia mean? Beach, the desert. So that's one thing we wanted to incorporate. Second thing is the beauty of having an international European company, French company, Sofitel. That's a great advantage too. And rather than flogging, you know, the beach scene and all that, because it's a Sofitel, it's great to incorporate French type design. So that's the second thing that we've put in.
Do you find it must be a fun challenge for you creating a flagship for such a well-known, famous brand around the world? Creating a flagship in this part of the world must be fun.
Obviously,
for you.
they're excited. as we're excited. It's particularly exciting for them because Accor is just on 30 years old, and that's where they started in Darling Harbour. So they've got Ibis there, and they've got the Novotel there. So they're so excited about being able to return back to their origins. And I think maybe, as Kingsley mentioned, they're opening in China, our biggest neighbour, of which I think it was mentioned this morning, 43% of hotel guests in Australia come from Asia. So we must, I wouldn't say compete with the Chinese, but we've got to give quality that the Chinese are used to. And they open 1 5-star hotel a week, you know, and they're all spectacular. And I've just come back from China, and we went around. We went to the fair in Guangzhou, but taking advantage of going to China, we went around to several places, you know, Beijing and Xi'an and Shanghai, and obviously took the advantage of staying in the Sofitels, which are all magnificent. In fact, all hotels are magnificent.
Did you have a favourite on your little tour of China? Was there a Sofitel that really stood out for you that was a beautiful hotel?
Well, our current favourite hotel is probably the Sofitel in Macau, which is at Ponty 14. Because the hotel is magnificent, it's spacious, it's near an interesting place, but it's hard to pick which your favourite is. You know, we stayed at Xi'an, which is where the terracotta soldiers were discovered, and it was a complex, large complex. Again, Paul reminded me of that, and in that complex is a 400-room Sofitel, a Mercure Grand, and they had an old building there from hundreds of years old, which has been closed. And it just opened up a few years ago as a Sofitel Legend. So here I'll advertise Sofitel Legend, and there's 5 legends in the world. And the Sofitel Legend is a Sofitel which has history to it. And that was absolutely magnificent, and that was only a couple of years old.
You've been quoted in the paper in the last couple of months about another Melbourne opportunity that could come up with a lifestyle brand attached to that. So that could be interesting. I know you can't say too much about it because there are discussions going on.
I'll get into trouble from then, Lise. But that project is what you see so much more of, which is combining residential with hotels. So you don't have just a explicit hotel product, but you've got a mixed product, and that's become more common, as it is in Asia, where you get virtual cities going up of residential, shopping and hotel.
And traditionally, you've always gone and purchased distressed assets, and you've got a wonderful collection of hotels, and now you're into new build hotels. Did something kind of change? You wanted to start from scratch, or is
well,
just
yes,
opportunities that come up?
The world changes, and if you become more affluent, you can afford to spend out a bit. But this wasn't the first of a new asset. The hotel I purchased before this off-the-plan hotel was Ibis King Street Wharf. And that was a new build, so that wasn't a distressed asset. And it was actually quite expensive for its price, being a 3-star hotel.
It gets a good room rate now too, I can see.
Well, it was expensive at the time. Same thing with the Sofitel. This Sofitel, that seemed expensive at the time, but you know, the reality is that you know, values do go up. You've got the cycle where they drop a bit, but then of course they go up.
And can you give us a bit of an insight into what you're doing in Surrey Hills? You've got the old Seabull there, which is now obviously a Ridges, and you're putting a couple more floors on. And you obviously you're looking at existing opportunities as well. How much of a challenge is there in adding floors on a building like that? Is it one of your harder challenges you've had to go through?
Well, going back to your original question, distressed assets. If you buy an old hotel, there's always potential. And that's always the enjoyment that I've received from the hotel industry is you buy a hotel, you look around and you see what can be done about it. And just as I said with the Victoria Hotel, fantastic location, the rooms are horrible. So bit by bit, you need to have funding. You can't just invest in a hotel that costs X dollars and only have X dollars. You've got to have, you know, some more than that. And you improve on it. So this particular hotel in Surrey Hills, when I purchased it, was called Citygate Siebel. I hated the name because it advertised a bank, and it was also quite a distressed hotel. I've had, the enjoyment of virtually upgrading everything from the foyer, putting a characteristic fish tank in the foyer, totally redoing the rooms and the common areas. And, since occupancy rate in Sydney is so high, well, you think, what else can you do? What's the cheapest way to improve, to increase your hotel rooms? Well, the cheapest way, obviously, is to put more rooms onto your existing hotel. You don't have to buy the land, you don't have to buy the reception. And so in this hotel, it seemed to me that it was all 8-storey hotel and there was a block that was 4 stories. So it's always been in my mind, well, let's fill in the gap. And that's the challenge, actually, going to council. There's always council hindering you, where really they should assist the hotel industry. I mean, with the old Claire, I'm sure that's a problem that Peng had with council, with heritage and all that sort of thing. So you go to council and ask them, could you put some more rooms in? And they say, unlikely. So I have an architect that works with all my hotels, and it's a trick we've used elsewhere, and you look at all your storage space that's been allocated to actually space for residential. And we counted that all up, and we suddenly realised, hey, we've got some more FSR, some more space ratio, and put the application in, and I put another floor in. And then I was talking to my lift man about extending the floor 1 level. He said, what's the point of extending 1 level? Why don't you extend it 2 levels? So went back to counting more space, went back to council, put the application in, and got 2 more floors on top.
Fantastic.
So that's all part of the challenge of it all. And
when it comes to sort of challenges at the moment, I mean, one of your biggest challenges ever, I think, to be fair, would be the Fairmont project in Leura in the Blue Mountains, on a hotel that was probably the owners couldn't care less about what happened to that hotel, and you got that in what was once a beautiful hotel in a very bad state, and you've turned that into a beautiful hotel. That was one of your greatest achievements, I think, in your
Well,
in your
I think that was my claim
career.
to fame. I kept a good hidden profile, and that's I think the hotel that brought me out of my hidden profile. I actually remember at the time I had a manager who then went to work at Lilienfels, and I kept telling him to tell his owner of Lilienfels, why don't they buy this hotel? And they said, too expensive, ridiculous. So I thought, well, let's have a look at it myself. So I went up there and with the agent, and it was totally empty. There was nobody around that famous fireplace, nobody there, but it was sort of a no-brainer. It was a beautiful hotel, yeah, maybe a bit neglected like any 22-year-old hotel at the time was. So I didn't think it particularly difficult that it wouldn't work. There's regional tourism, which is a whole new trip also, that we've got to promote our countryside and the Blue Mountains, and people do need places to stay. But I didn't, never at one stage did I think it wouldn't work. It's more a case of how much money do I need to pour into it to bring it back to its former glory and make it even better.
We've talked about a few things with food and beverage today, and you've got a microbrewery up in the Hunter Valley, and you've got a cidery as well. Are you going to try and throw that influence into some of your existing hotels by maybe putting brew pubs in, or have you thought about those kinds of concepts, obviously being such a passionate brewer now, Jerry?
There's never any space, so to actually put small breweries. And I started off with a small brewery. I had a pub in the city called the Macquarie Hotel, and I put a small brewery in there. And in Australia, obviously, you don't have any trouble building beer, so I had to put more tanks in until I outgrew the hotel. And that's why I was really good putting the brewery into the Hunter Valley, because there's plenty of space there. So certainly, my product is in all my hotels. And I suppose, in a way, that's lucky. If if you look at the story of Coopers, how it grew, Coopers didn't own any hotels, while CUB did own its hotels, so they had a automatic outlet to put their beer into. Well, it's the same with me. I have an automatic outlet to put the beer into. Yeah. But I think it adds quite a nice flavour to be able to have your own product into your hotel.
And you recently started up an airline. You've got shares in 2 airlines, I should say. You've got an airline that's going to be flying people up to Newcastle from Sydney, and then you've got a share in another airline.
You're reading your newspapers, yeah. It's all very new. Initially with the Hunter Valley, I guess that was a selfish thing. That I find it quite far to drive there, 2.5 hours, and I live on the waterside. So I was thinking, what a wonderful ability that would be just to go up with a flying plane.
Just straight from Rose Bay, mate.
That's right, so straight from Rose Bay.
Obviously, you think outside the square a lot, which I think has got a lot of owners kind of think about one thing. You really look outside the square. And what's driving your passion at the moment? I mean, obviously, you've got hotels in regional areas and city areas, and there's challenges and whatnot. What's really driving your passion at the moment?
Oh, a lot of things. Hard question. I think the Fairmont was probably pushing one of the things. So that was when I started my young family, and my boy was born then. So that particular passion was to make that the most child-friendly hotel in Australia. And I've done much the same thing in the Hunter Valley to try and put kids' facilities in. Merry-go-rounds and trains and mirror mazes and stuff like that. So I suppose that's one fashion, but it's just to really provide fun for people, and the brewery is a fun thing. There's a point of difference, and it's the experience to add to the experience of where you're actually, the location that you're at, to be able to add an individual experience of what the hotel could also give to you.
And I think with what Paul said in the last session, time, space, and experience, those 3 things are 3 things that you've always done. And Jerry, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your insights. And we look forward to, obviously, we're going to reveal it first with your hotel rooms at Sofitel Darling Harbour, I hope. So look forward to seeing what you do with that project. That's one of the second most significant one in Sydney, behind, obviously, the Packers Barangaroo development. Really, really exciting. Hope you get your helipad on the roof. And you obviously want to do the light show on the outside. Last question, Jerry, what's happening with the light show on the outside of the hotel?
That's not a problem. That's been approved and agreed to. One of the many issues we had with Lend-Lease is to make it better. And that's one of the most impressive things when you travel around China, particularly the newer cities of China, the light shows in all the buildings. So we've been able to negotiate with Lend-Lease to make the pixels smaller so that we can put coloured light shows on, and you can actually have writing going over the building. So, happy 2017. So that's been approved. The helipad, we're just about to put in the DA for that. So fingers crossed. Again, that's a no-brainer also.
Worst case, can you fly the airline into Darling Harbour and bring the planes in and just go from there to the Hunter Valley?
That's right.
I'm sure you will anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Jerry.
Okay. By the way, Jerry, it's faster than 2.5 hours now because there's an expressway between Newcastle and Lovedale. So it's 2 hours, okay? Don't sell yourself short. No, that was a great discussion. And speaking of light, the light show, we have, in fact, an expert with us today called Bruce Ramus. Bruce?
Yes.
There you are. Oh, you dropped a couple of things there. So you need to set up, Bruce?
He's just setting up now.
Okay, I'll pleased to meet you, Bruce. I haven't met you before. We've got another Canuck in the room. You're not from Winnipeg, are you?
No, sir. No, sir. Vancouver.
Vancouver. You don't like Winnipeg?
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. I'm sure Paul would appreciate that. So, Canadian-born, Bruce. He's got a career in the live music industry. I'm sure you've read about him in the bios there. It's a terrific CV, isn't it? Live shows, rock bands, U2, Bowie, James Brown, Academy Awards, MTV Awards, you name it. Bruce moved to Melbourne, formed his own company, and he also has done projects like the Digital Wall in Sydney's new retail centre, the Helix Tree. He's done the Federation Square in Melbourne, light in winter, LED installation in Brisbane's Queen Street Mall, and part of the Sydney Opera House Vivid Festival. I wasn't aware of that. So you're part of the Vivid?
Yes, the original one, yeah.
Okay, it's a terrific show. And by the way, a great YouTube video I had a look at.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, have you going to show it here?
I'll show a few videos.
Yeah, he does great work. Please welcome Ramus.
Right, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, one that I didn't really anticipate or expect. So many great design teams here, so it's really an honor to present to you. I am a Canadian. I'm based in Melbourne, and I've made a living making art with light since the late 70s or so. I've been asked to speak about what's been coined a term called the theater of light, and that is how a theatrical approach to lighting is now being seen in our cities, on our buildings, in our commercial and public spaces, more and more and more. And I want to talk about that approach and that experience. So obviously theater goes back thousands of years, and it began as a ritual, and that ritual is one of transformation. So when you go to a show or a concert or to a play or watch a movie or check into a hotel, you're engaged in that ritual. It's a ritual that you somehow envisage the potential for personal transformation, however small. You might be inspired by this experience, you might be enlightened, you might get educated, or maybe you might just feel rested and rejuvenated. So that's the experience that I believe underpins a theatrical approach. When I talk about lighting, it's essentially the qualities of that light are contrast and color, motion, all in the service of creating space for that viewer to feel a part of that ritual. And so my role as an artist or a designer is to create the space within my work for that ritual to occur. I wanted to show you a few examples of this work, and it starts a long time ago, for me anyway. It was the early 90s when images started to come on stage. So I'll just restart that. And 1 second, please. So the images always used to be on the side of the stage, and they lived out here, and your, excuse me, this is a bit confusing. They used to be part of your experience was always looking at the band, looking out here at the screens, and you were really drawn away from the central point. So the first time we brought the screens on stage, it looked like this. This was back in 1992. This is in Sydney at the football ground, or the cricket ground. And it's a bit of an assault on the senses, actually, now that I look at it. This was old technology. These were old televisions. The content was being played on laser discs. Everything about it looks a little dated to me, but still pretty cool. Even the haircuts look a little dodgy, but it was the first time that images got brought onto the stage and you became part of it. You, the live audience, became part of this show. So that was 1992, and from then, the technology got smaller and smaller and smaller. And that led me to design the next one, which was this. This is Vertigo, now 2006. And lots of LEDs everywhere. So with this band, we were the first to develop an LED video screen. And in this process, I learned how easy it is to kill a space with too much light, too much scale, too much energy coming from the stage. And I'll show you where I learned it. It was when we developed the first ever LED video screen, and it was too big, too high resolution, which is right here. So this there is 1997, and the screen was too big. I don't know if, can anyone see a band up there? So you came to watch a concert and you ended up watching a TV show. And as one of the central things I learned about this craft of bringing images into a public space is if you're not careful, you will kill the experience. You will deaden the space. And so great care must be taken when you install this kind of technology into your space. Whether it's on the face of your building or inside your building, it can kill a space very quickly unless done sensitively. So anyway, we continue and learned a lot about how people engage, how they stay in their bodies, and how they take this theatrical experience, which is a very aggressive, on the front foot type of experience. And I learned how they respond to that through projections, through LEDs, all of that. And I watched show after show, hundreds of thousands of people and how they responded. So I'll stop that now, and whew, I can just feel myself settle. That energy at the moment is really full on, and so it doesn't really work in the public environment, that type of energy. So when I moved to Australia, I took a year off from touring, decided I'm not going back out there in that jungle. And the first thing I did was I did the projections, the first projections on the Opera House for the first Luminous Festival, it was called then. So I contacted Brian Eno, and he did the content. I did the projection design with electric canvas, got the Opera House engaged, and we were able to present this work. So you can feel the difference of this and how this sort of settles into the public space. It's not demanding of you that you shift to it. You can come to it as you wish, and allows you the space to bring yourself to it. So this was a real sea change in my approach and my design, what we call design feeling. So how it feels to us, the designers, and how it feels to the viewers. So this was a very difficult design to do. These projectors you're looking at here are 650 meters from the building. So to map that accurately takes a lot of care. From there, we moved on to permanent installations. That one was temporary. We moved into permanent installations. And this is Luminous, the first reborn, essentially. This is on the Commonwealth Bank headquarters in Darling Quarter. It runs permanently and is essentially a low-resolution video screen that's 150 meters wide. So it's very high contrast. The color's quite saturated. So it's now taking the theatrical approach and applying it to the skin and the facade of a building. It's entirely interactive, so people can address it. They can bring themselves to it. This chap here, he grabs a color, paints across the buildings. These kids are playing Pong on one of our city buildings. So now we're creating the space for people to be. You all know about Vivid. This is a permanent part of Vivid, and that's bringing light into our consciousness more and more, albeit on a sort of popular scale, and sometimes it lacks the depth that I think it could have. But this is, to me, an opening in this in the architecture, in public space for us to engage in our cities, which is not possible at the moment. This particular facade is in Brisbane on the Queen Street Mall. It's a retail center. Again, it sits in the day, a beautiful sculptural facade, and comes alive at night. So these are just examples of how I feel like theatrical approaches are becoming more and more the norm for the skins of buildings and also within the insides of the building. This is the last facade I'll show, which is coming soon, next year, a Lend-Lease project. This is quite an elegantly lit building, and there's a weather station on the top. This is in Melbourne, so it's befitting of weather. And so as the weather changes, so the lights change. So the lights are driven by the data. So that connects it to its environment, connects it to what's going on in that space. So this is coming soon to the Docklands. Should be ready in about 6 months' time. I'll move forward to some indoor spaces where we start to shape the space. So this is an atrium that was way too high and felt very cold. We put this in a space, allowed the daytime to color it through the colored squares on these, it's called a pixel wave. So we fabricated this. This is a long 22-meter long wave made of four different panels. So the sun actually animates it during the day, and then at night, again, it becomes just a gentle moving canvas that really activates the space. And again, that becomes interactive at certain parts of the week. And it feels to me that this type of installation and this type of environment go hand in hand. These people, when I check into a hotel, I am looking for features, I'm looking for contrast, I'm looking for space that I can exist in that is not separate from the world, but allows me to be myself within that world. These are the things I feel can really change that feel of the space. This is Central Park, a retail environment where we're indoors still, a large video screen that, again, is entirely interactive. We always try and find ways to engage the people that are in the space. This is, all the content here is created by students and students from the universities. So there's an automatic engagement there for multiple generations. Their parents come and see it. Their whole families come and see it, and it is a win-win for this retail space. Moving forward, this is, we often work with point of view lights, lighting design, who do a lot of hotel interiors, and they've given me some images here. One of the projects we collaborated on is near here in Circular Quay, Cafe Sydney, which you can go have a look at. And it really shows the way video screens can be integrated and embedded. So these are a couple of images of it. This is a bar area, a waiting area for the restaurant while you wait for your tables. And it's for the space, it's quite a large screen. It's about 8 meters long. But you can feel this sort of gentle content that moves throughout the space and largely allows more space in this area than you can imagine. And we're doing a lot of these now. So in the day, it's a mirror. Behind that mirror is a screen, so you don't notice the screen, and you can see how soft this content is. It really befits the space and adds a kind of dimension to it that was previously impossible. There's a big wall there, and you start to feel like you're in a much larger space. So you can see how that works, and it's great to sit in that. With point of view's lighting in there, it really just sits in the space quite beautifully. These are some of Point of View's images that they've given me of hotel spaces they've been involved in. And you can start to see the contrast, the saturated colors of a theatrical approach. You see the lights slashing on the walls, the deep reds, and the contrast where light is not needed. So it provides wayfinding. It starts to shape the space with light. Very important part of this. Imagery and projections are coming into the space now. You can see in this hallway, as you enter, there's subtly shifting images, and the lights draw you down the space. So allowing that contrast to exist where it's not overlit and allows the person to be guided through the space. These are all types of lighting that I feel will work with the space, not in so much as developing a method by which people can live, but it's part of how they engage with each other and their relationships in that space. Screens, different types of imagery that can move slowly. All of this is part of what can make a space enliven. And again, the dark colors in the hotel rooms, which I'm not sure that I would be going for pink around my bed, but I love how this is now becoming part of this environment. More images showing the space created behind the bar, allowing deeper, rich colors to be a part of this expression. And even this, a pixelated screen, found this really works for me, and it creates this roundness, this warmth of an environment that is quite rich with light, I feel. These are all point of view images, which they've asked me to show, and we're taking this on as a real feature lighting, where we're creating images like this. This is the Cosmopolitan, where this is Las Vegas, so we have a whole range of opportunities that might not be available in other cities and locations. As you can see, this is quite a dramatic installation that almost disrupts the space and makes you feel you're in a very different place now, quite transformative. And I love how this feels. We're working a lot of what we call cloaking. So cloaking is to us where you can establish, for instance, this is a library. It is a digital library where you can see into the space, where you can get a sense that that there's some room in there that doesn't necessarily exist. So it gives the owner or the hotelier a way to create a different environment in their world. I think it's very effective. For us, this is one that's coming soon to a casino near you, which is this appears like a skylight. This skylight, there's nowhere to put this skylight, but they wanted light, natural feel coming into the building. So we have a digital screen recessed up in the ceiling, and we have a camera on the roof. The camera points at the sky and shows the actual sky on the screen. So it will feel just like a skylight, so you won't be able to tell whether it's real or whether it's not. Again, that's for us, it's called cloaking, excuse me. And I feel like it can be done internally or externally. We're doing some work on 200 George Street, where there's an area behind it where you can't see out. It is just big high-rise buildings. So we can create windows, virtual windows, that allow people to see. It turns what is essentially a buried space into what feels like a rooftop garden. So we have cameras on the roof looking out at the botanical gardens, looking out at the sea, creating a whole seascape that you would never be allowed to have. That's recessed into the wall, so you're not quite sure what you're looking at, but the feel of it is quite natural. The feel of it, again, is creating more space in this environment. Subtler versions of this, less expensive, are in lobbies that where, such as this, we call it see-through. This is an art piece where, as the person approaches, their shadow appears. Again, using cameras and sensors and light to really create a theatrical effect, to delight the viewer, to really gain their. To me, it's to give them a sense of ownership of the space. Similarly, there's this piece, which is the reflection. It looks like a mirror, and you can, it's concave. You can see yourself in it, and it has the ability to transform, change that image whenever. So as it grows, for this piece, as it goes into the evening and there's no people in the lobby, it changes and follows the moon cycle, so it becomes this image of the moon. So that's an example of our work and what we're interested in. It feels like there's a potential, either internally or externally, to transform any space. And it feels like the cities of the future and the cities that I'm interested in are ones that I can engage in. Currently, most of the cities that I visit are largely brown or gray, and there's nowhere for me to be in them. I can't engage with any of the buildings. I feel like there's more color needed. I feel like there's more engagement that I want to be a part of, that I know my kid wants to be a part of. So I loved what you were talking about the kids' space. Darling Quarter is a great example of how it's shaped for a family space. And I feel that that engagement is part of this movement of theatrical approaches to public space, where the experience is transformative. That's my presentation. I would like to open it up to other questions if anyone has any questions for me. If not, yes.
How easy is it to deal with councils around this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, how easy is it to deal with councils when we're putting screens and developing facades? And generally, we find we're having good results. It's not straightforward because council guidelines are largely outdated and they don't account for this change in the movement of light. And first of all, there's the obtrusive lighting guidelines and the dark sky regulations. So we pay really careful attention to that. Darling Quarter was a great example of that, where the light does not come out of the building or go into the building. It stays right within the windowsill. So we managed to get a 6-star rating there. Also, if they are considered public art, which our pieces normally are, there's a whole other set of guidelines for that. That being said, we look to power them sustainably. We look to, and we always have to prove that we're not just blinding light into the atmosphere. So we use very low power, very efficient lighting, and the content is, so for Darling Quarter, we had to go through approvals for the roads, for the CASA, the aircraft authorities, City of Sydney, Sydney Harbour Foreshore, they all had hoops we had to jump through. So it's not straightforward because of the outdated guidelines, and we're part of trying to rewrite those. But it's certainly achievable, and we found great response from both Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane, and in Australia there's actually a lot of forward-thinking people in those institutions, I find. Yes, one more.
Sorry, what's next?
What's next in terms of the technology? That's an interesting question. So for me, there's a couple of things that I'm watching. One is graphene, which I don't know if you are aware of that. Graphene is 10 times stronger than steel and lighter than a human hair. And so I feel like all lights will be made of this soon. I've seen the first graphene LED, which is, and when we look back in 1992, when a projector was about this big to shoot an image this big, and now, an LED is, I can fit 100 in my hand. The first graphene LED is out. It only lasts 4 seconds, so not quite ready to go to market yet. But that's the biggest shift I think is coming. OLEDs are another technology that shows promise, but are as yet unproven. They're not bright enough, and they're not efficient enough in production yet to do them in quantities. But those we feel like could provide great opportunities in cloaking. So we envisage that we'll be able to cloak an entire building. So by putting OLEDs, we proposed it to Barangaroo, but it didn't fly. Because everybody was upset about the towers being there and they lose their view, we proposed to put OLEDs in all of the windows, the onshore facing windows, and a camera facing to the water. And now your building is almost not there. So that's where I think that these sorts of things are going. Yeah, thanks for your questions. I appreciate it. Anybody have any other questions for me? Okay.
Thank you, Ramus.
Thank you.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Very much.
Yeah, the theatre of light. Indeed. Look, we're going to break for coffee, and let's not forget that part of the business that we're in, we're talking about design and all these, the neighbourhood and everything else, but we still need beds, we still need carpets, we still need textiles and great surfaces, and we've got all that on display over here. I know some of these are hidden because of the way the booths have been set up, but really, please take a little bit of time during the coffee break, if you would, to say hello to the people back there. They've got some great stuff. I saw another wave over there. So I did introduce you to them earlier, and they're all waiting for you for sure. Samantha, Sandra, Peter, and all the girls and boys over there. So let's break for coffee. And we've got a couple of really good sessions to finish with on technology and quizzing the internationals. So see you at 4 o'clock, please.